Hello, my name is Stan Walters. I'm chairman of the 1994 Fly Tyers Exposition. The tires on these tapes are just a few of the 85 who have come from 5 western states to tie for this event. The tapes will be available for sale from the Oregon Council Federation of Fly Fishers, whose address is P.O. Box 40276, Eugene, Oregon 97404. We all hope you enjoy the viewing. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Glenn Wilson, and I am from Tacoma, Washington. And today I will be demonstrating tying a D-stripped winged salmon fly. These flies originated in Scotland and England in the early to mid 1800s, used for Atlantic salmon fishing. These flies are peculiar in a way that they are tied on what we call blind-eyed salmon hooks. These hooks are basically a standard shanked hook with, as you can see, no eye. So what we have to do on this particular type of fly is that we need to install an eye. At that particular time, we used to use silkworm gut, which is a material like this, and it is 2 strands or 3 strands of single gut, which is wet, twisted together and let dry. This will then form our eye. They were not nearly as strong as our modern day hooks, but at the time that these hooks were originated and the fishing was being done, this was all that was available. And so what we will need to do is to install silkworm gut onto our blind-eyed salmon hook. These particular types of flies, when purchased, oftentimes are very expensive. There are handmade hooks being made here in the United States, which can be very expensive. So unlike a standard fly where you would just put it into your vise and start tying, we need to protect our hooks to keep the finish from being disrupted. What we use is, in this particular case, is a small piece of plastic gasket. This particular piece of material is off of a fly tying or fly box, a hook box, which is made of a plastic type material. We then cut this to form a gasket to surround the hook bend to keep it from being marred in the vise. So what we do then is we take this piece of gasket and we will form it around our hook. So we'll take the hook and take this gasket material and fold it and place the hook into the gasket. What this then does is protects our finish and keeps the hook from being marred. These particular types of flies are more of an art form and an expression of artistic fly tying, really. They can be used for fishing, and many people do use these flies. So what we're trying to do here is basically tie presentation flies, which you would perhaps put behind a shadow box or perhaps in a dome. And so the reason that we want to protect this is so that when the fly is viewed, you're not seeing any marring on the surface. What I'm using here is a Renzetti vise, which has a jaw opening to accept all sizes of hooks. It's a very strong type of vise, which is a true rotary vise, which means the whole vise will rotate and keep my fly on a straight axis. Once I will install this hook, you can see what I mean about it being a rotary vise. I install the hook into the collets as far as I can and try to lock in the shank of the hook as tightly as I can, and then basically adjust the back to hold the hook. And as you can see, it's in the vise flat. And through the whole process of tying this fly, I need to rotate the fly to be able to view and to maneuver materials as I'm tying. And as you can see, this rotary action keeps my fly in a straight plane, which makes it easier for me then to manipulate materials. And as we progress with the fly, you can see how this particular type of aid will help in your tying so that you can view your fly from all angles. And I find that to be a very good help. The first thing that we're going to do now is we're going to install silkworm gut. And there are 2 different types I'd like to show you. One is a very clear material, which is on my right here. And this is 2 strands of silkworm gut that are wound together. And on my left here is the same type of silkworm gut, which is a frost color. It's a gray color. This is personal preference. It depends on what you want to use and what you want the fly to look like. In this particular case today, I'm going to use the clear and show you how we are going to install this onto our hook. What I like to use when I'm tying these flies is a 6/0 primrose thread. The reason for the light color is so that I can see throughout the whole process of the fly where my thread wraps are going to lay. With these types of flies, we are trying to account for every wrap of thread or every piece of material, and you only use as many wraps of thread as you need to get the job done. So we're not trying to create bulk, but strength through proper thread wraps and proper conduct with the materials. So I like to use the primrose so that I can see where I'm going with my thread, and in the very, very end, I will change over to black thread so that I can finish the head. But I will start with the 6/0 primrose. What I will do is start back about 1/8 of an inch from the eye, and I will basically just put 1 or 2 thread wraps. After I get 2 thread wraps going towards the back of the fly, I will get a little bit of thread here and counter spin it. The reason for this is to get the thread flat. Flat thread wraps are more secure than round thread. It basically covers more area, and you don't have to have as many wraps to give you a neat appearance and at the same time give us something that's going to be structurally sound. I tie tailwards approximately 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, still holding onto my tag to lock it in. This will lock the thread against the hook shank. When I get back an appropriate distance, I will then take my scissors. These are what we call Thompson ice scissors. And what I have done is I have gone through and taking the very, very tips of these scissors and using a file, sharpening the edges down so that I have a very, very fine point. The reason for this is so that I can reach into the nooks and crannies and perhaps snip out one fiber or any other manipulation that I have to do where I need to get into a confined space. So I have done that with my scissors this way, and it's a great aid for me to be able to work in tight quarters. I'll lay my scissors against the shank on the back side and just remove the excess that you have there. Again, counter spinning the thread, I'm laying a base for the gut eye. I will then go forward towards the eye, spiraling my thread, and as you can see, it does flatten or fan the thread. The next thing we need to do now is we need to go through, and I have to create a loop. This is a very rigid material. What I want to do is create an eye very similar to what a metal eye would look like. The reason that we have the length that we do is that when it's tied in, this will act as the eye of the fly, and we need enough to be able to give us strength. They actually fished with these back in the 1800s, and they do get soft and they can get brittle. And so by tying it in a long way and securing it, you're going to have something that is going to give you longevity as well as, with this type of fly, good looks. What we do on this particular type of fly is I take a bobbin, another bobbin that I have, and I'm going to use the very, very upper portion of the tube to create my eye by simply taking the material and laying it across the bobbin, holding it with my thumb. Let me just cut this superficial stuff here off so you can see. I'm basically going to create a loop around the tube, and then with my thumbnail, I'm going to take this and crimp it. And I'm going to just wiggle it back and forth to create a nick on one side. I will then take it, as you can see, it has a bump in it. And I need to do this with both sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it, turn it over, place it back on the bobbin, do the same thing to the other side, and just crimp it very, very tightly back and forth with a rocking motion to create a crimped eye around the shank. And I'm going to do this several times because it's a stiff material, and I want to be able to have something that aesthetically is going to be pleasing and show a nice rounded eye so that it has a tapered look to it. And that adds to the appeal of these flies so that you have something that aesthetically looks nice. After 2 or 3, 4 times spinning this back and forth, I'm going to end up with what they called a nipped gut eye. And this then is what I'm going to end up with. is going to be a little ball-like projection at the end of the silkworm gut. This then will become the eye of the fly. As you can see, we have two rear arms hanging out. This will be lashed down underneath the shank of the hook. This will go underneath as a tapered type of gut eye, and we're going to hide this with material so that you're not going to see it. When the fly is finished, you will basically see this little nipped end at the front of the fly, and then the fly projecting beyond that. So with that in mind, we're just going to take it, make sure that both sides are nipped equally, and we're going to then lash it to the hook. What I like to do is turn this fly over, and with this particular type of vise, it's not a problem. I now have my thread about 1/8 of an inch back from the eye. I don't want to crowd the eye because these flies basically flow from the head back, and you need a space where it's not going to be built up with a lot of thread. I basically take this nipped eye then, and as you can see here, I'm going to take and keep these both of these strands occupied on either side of the under part of the hook, so that you're going to end up with this ball eye coming out with the shank of the tip of the fly in the middle of that ball. This then creates our eye. What I will do is take my thread around the gut eye and pull as hard as I possibly can without breaking the 6/0 thread. You need to be kind of judicial here so that you're not breaking. And I'm going rearwards. And I will go edge to edge with flat thread wraps because they're much more secure. And at the same time, I'm holding this underneath the fly. What I will want is I want this to basically have a straight appearance underneath the hook shank. And by taking and spinning my thread counterclockwise and then running my thumbnail down the thread, I get a ribbon-like appearance, which is going to give me flat wraps, not so much bulk, and still give me the strength that I need. So I will continue to do this, edge to edge, over the shank of the hook and over the silkworm gut. Now this type of body has a fur, or the whole fly has a fur body. And as you can see, I'm going edge to edge. After I run out of that flat thread, I'll basically go back, counter spin it, run my thread down, and you'll hear this will become redundant, but it's an important aspect of getting flat thread wraps so that we don't build up bulk. Now with a seal fur body or Angora body or any other type of material, I am not so concerned about having this little bump here. If I were to do a floss body or a tinsel body, as you can see as I come up to this particular point of the fly, I'm going to have a big bulge there. And I would then take a razor blade or a pair of scissors and I would pare that down and basically make a nice neat taper. And I would build a body with other types of floss to give me bulk so that I have a nice neatly tapered body. This body is going to be of the seal's fur or other type of fur, which is going to give us a spiky, halo-y type of effect, which is sparse, but at the same time is going to be full. It's going to give us spiky-like projections, but at the same time, it's going to give you a buggy look, and it just flows in the water very, very well. So I'm going to take this again, just counter spin it. If you were going to fish this type of fly, and many people now are fishing these types of hooks for steelhead and salmon, what they have been experimenting with is using Dacron, just standard 20 or 30 pound Dacron, and tying it in the length of the hook with the same type of eye. It's a little bit more soft, but by tying in the whole length of the shank and putting a drop of super glue on there, it becomes very, very rigid. It will not come out. And it lets that fly sway in the current, and it's very appealing, and it swims in the water very well. You don't have a lot of materials on it, so it does sink rapidly, and with the materials that we're going to use, it just flows gracefully, and it is a real nice-looking fly. Again, edge to edge. When I get back towards the point of the hook, I'm using the point and the barb of the hook as basically as a guideline as to proportions. I'm going to take the thread and keep wrapping it back until I'm about in the middle of the point, and this being the point of the hook, this being the barb of the hook. Where the barb comes down and it meets the shank, that is called the root of the barb. And we use these as proportions to be able to gauge where, in this particular part of the fly, we're going to have a section back here of tinsel, and that's going to be called a tag. And so we want to be able to proportion it evenly so that when you're tying flies, they'll all look about the same. What I can do then is use my thread hanging down as a plumb bob so that I can see exactly where my materials are. For this particular tag, we are going to use some silver tinsel. I will use a flat tinsel. This particular type of material is what we call Leguartin, and it is a metal tinsel. Unlike, this is a flat Leguartin silver, and it is a metal tinsel, so it is not a mylar, and it has a tendency to kink, but the nice thing about it is it gives you authenticity, and it also gives you antiquity, which these flies back then, they didn't have mylars and plastics, and all of their tinsels were probably from France, Varnays and those types of tinsels, and they were made of metal. They also used another type of tinsel, which is an oval tinsel, and this is a round type of section, and in the center there is a cotton core with tinsel over the top of it. And these were used in military uniforms, in embroideries, that type of things, and they called them threads or fancy work. But we will use these two different types of tinsels through the body, and we will use one type of tinsel, a flat, for the tag. What I will do is strip off several inches. I try not to shortchange myself when I strip off the tinsel, so I will pull off approximately 6 or 7 inches of tinsel. I'm not worried about the cost of this material, but I do want to have enough so that I can handle it and get the job done without having running out of materials and causing problems for myself. So what I will do is cut off a section, and before I go on, what I generally do is I will take my scissors and I will create a sharp angle at the end of my tinsel. And so I will cut just a very, very sharp angle on that, someplace where my thread can grip this. What I will be doing is I will be tying on bare shank back on the bend of the hook and then back forward. So I'll be going over the tinsel 2 times. What I generally do is take this material then and offer it up underneath the hook shank. And then I could just grab it with 1 or 2 wraps of thread. And then what I will do is spiral my thread out of the way so that I can proceed with my work. What I will do then is I will take this tinsel and I will basically bend it. And so I have 1 wrap of tinsel there, and I'll take my thumbnail and I'll basically crease this because it's been pleated, it's been rolled over on itself. And so I will take my thumbnail or any other type of material, you can use pliers or any handle from your scissors, and just create a crease there, and that will give you a flat wrap. Again, we don't want to build up excess bulk. What I will do now is go edge to edge. You do not want to overlap your tinsel. This is, again, metal tinsel, and it is not as yielding as mylar. And so I'm going to take this and I'm just going to run it back. So again, I'm using the tip and the point and the root of the barb as guidelines as to how I'm going to set up my proportions for the tag of the fly, which is exactly what we're putting on now. I'll get the tinsel to about this particular point, and what I will do now is I was wrapping backwards. I'm going to start wrapping forward with a slight angle, edge to edge, back to where I started. So I'll be going over the tinsel now, and I'm coming on a slight angle now forward, and I can feel the tinsel slide off itself and go edge to edge. And that's what I want to accomplish here, is that nice smooth taper down and back. So if you have overlapped your tinsel, you're going to find that you're going to have these little lumps and bumps. Not that it's going to bother the fish, but if you're putting something in a frame, or if you're putting something in a dome, you want that nice, neat appearance. Now I'm going to get right back to where I tied this tinsel in initially, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my thread and I'm going to back off to where I started. I just moved this to get it out of the way. I can take all the wraps of thread off that I had holding the tinsel on, because the tinsel now is holding itself. There's nothing holding this, no thread, just the tinsel holding tinsel. So on an angle, I'll take my thread then, and I will go over the tinsel, and you have to be careful because this is metal tinsel, and it will cut the thread. So I will put a flat thread wrap on there. 1 wrap is holding it. I could basically then take it and go over 3 or 4 times with flat thread wraps, just to be sure that it's secure. So I've got 3 wraps there. The nice thing now about metal tinsel is I can take a pair of tweezers and I can fasten it onto the tinsel, and wiggle back and forth until it breaks. When it does break, it gives us little fingers that will help to hold the thread. And so these little fingers then will hold the thread and keep this thing from slipping. So what I will do then is just grab this tinsel and just then wiggle back and forth, and it just breaks off cleanly. So I have a small little edge here with little fingers that will hold this flat tinsel. I'll take one more wrap over that, and that then completes what we would call our tag. Again, flat thread wraps. What I'm going to do is go over those same wraps right to where I started. So about 3 wraps will take me right to the very end of where I had the tag. What I will be using for a tail is a golden pheasant crest feather. This is from, of course, a golden pheasant, and what we're looking for is an aesthetic shape. And so these have been washed and then cleaned in woolite to give us luster, and then they've been laid out to dry. So what I will be doing here is I will try to take and keep this white pithy material, because in cross-section, a golden pheasant tail feather or even the crest for what we would call a topping has a triangular system, a triangular stem. And if you just try to tie in up here, what you're going to notice is that this thing will try to cock and try to twist, and it will not lay flat. But back here at this white pithy area, at the base of the fibers, it's a more soft material, and that's where we want to work. That's where we want to tie this thing in. What I've done then is I take my thumbnail, and I'm just going to take underneath it, and I'm just going to slowly squeeze on it to give me a more open shape. You can see how the crest then has this nice open veiling, and that's what I'm looking for in this particular type of fly. And I want it to lay low. I don't want it to lay very, very high. So this is kind of the appearance that I'm trying to achieve, is this long, low, open type of look. And the color of the golden pheasant is just a wonderful material. But what I'm going to do to prepare this then is I'm going to change over and to take a pair of pliers. And these are just fisherman's pliers that you can find at your local fishing merchant. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to take this particular stem and I'm going to take it sideways into my pliers, right at the very, very base of the fibers, and I'm going to squeeze it to squish this thing down to give me a flat platform. This way it's not going to roll, it's not going to twist, it's going to lay in flat, and I just put a fair amount of pressure on there to be sure that the stem is flat. And that's all I'm going to do. After doing that a couple of times, we now have our topping or our crest that we're going to put in for our tail. What I will do is my thread now is laying exactly where the tinsel stopped. I'm going to take my thread, again, flat thread wraps, and I'm just going to put a loose wrap of thread around there and position this where I want it. I'm going to position it directly on top of the hook shank, and while I'm wrapping my thread, I am not putting tension on it until I pull straight up. When I pull straight up, what that's doing is it's not pulling it to the left, it's not pulling it to the right, it's pulling it straight up, so it's locking it down onto the shank. And I'll do that, and I'll pull up, and I'll take a wrap, and I'll pull up. After I do that a few times, what I can do is take the crest and move it just a little bit by grabbing the stem and just getting it exactly so it's on top of the hook shank. And this is what we're going to end up with, is a small golden pheasant crest that's open for the tail. On these types of flies, because they're long and flowy, I like to have the tail a little bit longer. What we're going to be doing for our next step, and you can certainly at this point in time take your scissors flat on the shank and cut off the excess material that you were using for the stem. And by taking my fingernail, I can, if it moves a little bit, which oftentimes it does, I could just take my fingernail and get it right back where I was. Flat thread wraps completes it, and it's locked onto the hook shank. Again, what I will do now is with flat thread, I'm going to go back to exactly where I started, fanning the thread out. And at this point, what I'm going to be using is I'm going to have jungle cock, and I'm going to use 2 jungle cocks. And as you can see, they have a slight list. One lists to the left, one lists to the right. What I do is I take one feather from each side of a neck on a jungle cock. And what I will show you is basically a jungle cock neck. And by taking one from the left and one from the right, what they're doing then is that's giving me a nice arched feather from each side that will lay up against each other and give me a nice curvature. And that's what I want to do with this particular fly, is to have something that I can seat in the tail veiling, inside the tail. That is what's called a tail veiling. The feather that has the upward curve is going to be towards me, and the feather that has the outside curve is going to be on the other side, what we would call 3 o'clock. If this were a clock, up on top would be 12 o'clock, away from me would be 3 o'clock, directly underneath the hook shank would be 6 o'clock, and on my side of the shank looking at me would be 9 o'clock. These are terms that are used oftentimes to let people know where things are going to be tied in and tied off. So if I say I'm going to be tying this in at 12 o'clock, it's going to be directly on top of the hook shank. So what I do then is I'm going to take the jungle cock and I'm going to strip off the superficial fluff that you see here at the base. The reason that we want to do that is it's just going to get in the way and it's not going to give us a tight tying point to the hook shank. So what I'll do is I will take this material and I'll basically strip it off on both sides so that I'm left with a feather that has a nice angle to it, and I'm going to do that exactly the same for both feathers. Here's the other side, and in the beginning here I'm just going to guess. I'm just going to take and I'm going to strip this material off, and then what I will do is I'll hold both of these together to be sure that I have them stripped the same. So I basically will lay this up to my finger and put both of these pieces together and sandwich them so they go what's called back to back. So I've got the jungle cock showing on one side, and I've got the jungle cock showing on the other side. Now these have not been matched exactly, but this is the kind of idea that we're trying to go for, is back to back. What we will do then is once these get fully matched, and if I have to strip off some more fluff, I will. The one thing that you will want to do is that you will want to strip some of this material off underneath here so that we can get this to sit inside that tail. And so what I will do then too is to take one feather, the one that's usually facing to me, and I'll strip some of those materials off underneath the hook shank so that there's a small stripped area underneath here that's just about 1/8 of an inch. Now this is a guideline right now just to see how this is going to offer up to the tail. And I'll do this to both sides. Now this feather is facing me, so this is on my side with the curvature up. I'll grab the other one from the other side. That's going to be facing away from me, and so I will certainly want to strip the underside of this feather. And I'll, again, eye it and just strip off the fluff. What we want to do, again, is that we have another stem, and unlike the triangular stem of the golden pheasant, this too has an awkward type of stem. And what we want to do on this is we want this feather basically to sit just like this, edge to edge, so it's sitting in the back of the fly. And by just tying it in this way, it's liable to twist one way or the other. What we're going to do is we're going to take the feather, we're going to take our pliers, and I'm going to take and put my pliers this way and crimp it down from the top. So I'm getting a flat appearance in here. I will offer it up, hang on to it, and again, just squeeze. And this will then give me a flat spot on the stem, and that will give me a place where I will have a tie-in. And I will do the same thing with the other piece. Again, get the section that is going to be facing down where the stem is missing. Grab your pliers on the top of the shank and squeeze. And as you can see, it's fairly straight. It does have an angle, but when they are back to back, you're going to see that these will offer themselves up well inside that tail. So I'm putting a very firm pressure on this to collapse that stem. Again, I'll take the two feathers and put them back to back. And get them as close as I possibly can to an evenness. And if it's not even, you can see these are a little bit off. I've got the fibers that I've stood straight up. I can grab those fibers then and pull them out. Now you can either pull them out with your fingers, or in this particular case, I'm using a pair of tweezers called Tweezer Man. These are made in Italy, and they are very, very fine points. I can reach in and grasp a single fiber of something and pull them out with these. So these are very valuable tools to have while you're doing any type of fly tying, whether it's picking up a small piece of material from your bench or going in and removing 1 or 2 fibers of something, a good pair of tweezers will go a long way. And I did pick these up at a woman's beauty shop. And so I'll remove some of that superficial fluff. And I'm down now to bare stem. And so what I'll have is I've got 2 jungle cock back to back. And this is what your tail veiling will look like. Now I did have to shorten this up, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back on the underside, and perhaps I might have to remove some. I can just kind of gauge it back here and see if it's going to be the proper length. And generally you want it about where the bend of the hook is. So while they're both back to back, I'm going to take my pliers again, and I'm going to put it right to where the end of the fluff was, and squeeze. And try to get them. As you can see, it has an upward appearance. So that's going to fit neatly into the tail veiling, into the tail itself. So this would be called a tail veiling. And by squeezing it down, I'm collapsing those fibers. Now by not moving my hand too much, my thread is exactly where the tinsel stopped. I'm basically going to take that last wrap of thread off, and I'm going to offer these things up on top of the hook shank. I'm going to take a loose wrap of thread over them and pull straight up. And I'll do that again. I might do that 3 times. I will take the stems, try to align them, and then basically take a look and see what we've got. Now you might have to do this 1 or 2 times to get them exactly where you want them. And sometimes what you can do is take your tweezers in here and try to straighten them out just a little bit and realign them if that's what they need. And oftentimes you'll have to do this 1 or 2 times because they're not the easiest pieces of feathers to get in where you want them. And I'll just put a couple of wraps in here just to secure them as I'm sitting here and manicure them and trying to get these things to fit where I want them. Another tool that's important that comes in quite handy for tying any type of fly, in this particular case, this is a small, thin bodkin. This is a Renzetti bodkin with a fine point. And I find that this is very valuable in my tying for removing materials, getting things out of the way, picking out seal's fur or any other type of dubbing, or separating fibers for a wing. So these, I can take this and put it underneath this tail veiling and try to collapse everything and get these fibers on their own side. And if they're not following directions, you might have to do it over again. I will put a little saliva oftentimes up on top just to be sure that I can guide these things to where I want them. When you get the tail veiling, you can take the tail and oftentimes move some of the fibers to see if you can get it to sit right inside of the tail. So that would be our tail veiling. Now I've got these stubs that are sticking up, and of course we're going to be going over the body with seal's fur. So I'm not too worried about these. What I can do at this point in time, if I wish, is I can go over these to make sure that they're really tied down with 4 or 5 wraps of thread, and where these 2 little bumps are where the feather actually stuck into the quill, I can take a pair of scissors, reach in here, and just snip them off on a slight angle. And this way here, again, I've got no lumps and bumps. Very important for a smooth body, such as a tinsel body or a floss body. This particular one, it's not that much big of a deal. I'm going to flatten out my thread, bring it back towards the very, very end of where I've got my tail veilings. And what I'm going to do at this point in time is I'm going to tie in my body tinsels. I'll be using 2 different types. I'll be using another flat silver LaGuartin. This is of medium size. And so I'll take, again, several inches of this. This will go through my body and attach one of the feathers that I'll be using for the whole body. So I've got flat silver tinsel, and then I have an oval gold tinsel. This is basically what you would call this is going to be protecting the quill of the feather, so it's going to be followed by the feather to keep it, in the old days they used it to protect the quill from fish's teeth, so it didn't break the feather out, and so that's what we'll be doing here. I'll take several inches of the flat silver and lock it into the little holder it's got there and cut the material off. I oftentimes use the very, very root of these scissors. Perhaps you should use a heavier duty pair of scissors. You should have a fine pair and a heavy duty pair for doing this type of tying. These would be a heavy duty pair of scissors that I probably should have used to cut my tinsel. But what I can do is use the very, very root of these scissors for my heavier work, and then use the points for my fine work, and that will suffice as well. What I will do then is I cut the silver. I'm going to do the same with the oval gold. I'm going to strip off several inches, lock it back into its holder, and trim off a section of the oval gold. This is about 6 inches. Plenty for me to work. Standard ribbing on these types of flies in the old days was 5 wraps of tinsel. And so what I want to do at this particular point is I'm going to tie both of these in the back. I'll go through and do half of my body, and then I will tie in my body feather. This is a yellow marabou feather, and the reason that we like these is basically because it has a very, very thin quill, very, very thin stem. And what we like about this, it doesn't give us a lot of bulk. So when you're buying these types of feather, it's important to try to look for the finest quills that you can, because they can often be very, very thick. I think that the finer it is, the neater your fly is going to be. And as you can see, there's a very, very mobile, and this is going to give us a very lively effect in the water. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to prepare my tinsels, very, very similar to what I had done for the very back of the fly, the tail. I'm going to take my scissors, and I'm going to create a very sharp angle and by having this sharp angle, it's going to give me a place to tie in my tinsel with the thread and not create a lot of bulk. So this is going to be, the silver is going to go in first, and I'm going to put this in, again, remember we've got 12 is the top, 3 is the far side, 6 is underneath, 9 o'clock is to me. I'm going to take this and tie this in underneath at about 6 o'clock. With this type of vise, again, I can change this and turn it. I can slide the tinsel into it, grab it with 1 or 2 wraps of thread, and although it's on my side, I can take my thumb and I can push it exactly where I want it. So right now it's just about 6 o'clock, and I'm tying my thread back towards the tail. Now I have a little material clip here, which I will just lock that tinsel in just to get it out of the way. On the oval gold tinsel, what we have is we have a gold tinsel over a cotton core. What I can do is take my thumbnail and strip some of the material off, and as you can see, we have a cotton core and we have a small piece of gold tinsel that's hanging from the side. What I will do is remove the tinsel so that when I'm tying it in by the cotton core, which gives me less bulk. I don't have a big bump there. So what I can do is just reach in with my scissors, move the stuff out of the way, and just cut it as close as I possibly can. This will be tied directly beside the flat tinsel, but on my side. If this is tied in at 6 o'clock, then this particular piece of tinsel is going to be tied in at 7 o'clock. So it's going to be more on my side. I'll hold it up, and I'll tie it in with my thread on the cotton core, and I'll slide it down so it's exactly next to the tinsel, so they're side by side. You have the flat, and then you have the gold next to it. And I'll, again, tying back towards the tail, and I'll put another wrap of tinsel on there. This time, my thread is over the tinsel and the cotton core, and so as I start to come back now towards the front of it, it's all locked in. I can just come up about 1/8 of an inch. I have a small cotton core here, which is not adding any bulk. And now I've got both my body tinsel and my ribbing tinsel tied in at the back of the fly, and I can forget that now. What I will do is prepare my body materials. In this case, I have a small kit here, which was used for carrying gemstones, and then I have a small traveling kit with seal's fur. This seal's fur was purchased years ago when it was available around here, and I have it in small packages so I can take this with me and have it at my disposal. As you can see, there's a wide array of colors that you can dye yourself. Most of it comes in this particular type of shade, which is a natural color, and then you just take and dye it any color you want. The Atlantic salmon flies from years ago were pretty much standardized in colors, and by reading several of the books, you can go through and get an idea of what colors you will need to tie these flies. This particular fly is called a yellow eagle, and it's going to have a yellow, half yellow body, half orange body. So what I will do is I will take a vial of the yellow. This is called golden yellow. And I will also use orange. Now this is a medium orange. And both are very, very good fishy colors. And I will use the yellow at the back of the fly, and I will use the orange for the forward part of the fly. At this particular time, what we can do is from where you have your tail to where you're going to end your fly would be considered the body. And 50% of the body would be about here. This is where I will stop the yellow and then start the orange. So it's going to be 50% yellow, 50% orange. I'm going to try to acquire a taper very much like a cigar, where it's going to start fairly small, get large in the middle, and then again taper down to the front. The reason that we like to do that is that, first of all, the spikiness of seal's fur or Angora or any other type of natural materials, as you can kind of see, we have a real spikiness to the material. And by tying it in fairly sparse, but by building it up and pulling the materials back, we can get a real bulky look with a halo effect where the sunlight will go through it. And that's very appealing to give you a buggy looking fly. So what we will do is take this seal's fur, and I hold a little bit in my fingers, probably about this much to work with. It's not a whole lot, but there's no sense in wasting it. Again, another nice feature about this particular vise is that I can move it out of the way and get that hook point out of my way, so I'm not going to be running my fingers into it and not catching my thread. As you can see, I've moved about 1/8 of an inch forward to where my tail was. The reason is that I don't want to get these fibers trapped in there and push down on the tail. I can tie backwards to get the right proper look and get the seal fur started at the very end, and then proceed forward so I have a nice even look. What I do is, again, it doesn't matter if you have flat thread wraps, but I take a small quantity of material. That's about all you want to do to put onto the thread. The reason that you don't want a whole lot is that it's not going to get trapped on the thread. You're not trapping it, but what you're doing is you're rolling it on there. And what will happen is it'll end up coming out. It'll come out in big blobs. We don't want that. We want to be able to put a bodkin in there and pull it out to create that halo effect, and you can do that by having it tight, having it tied tight, and then picking it out at your discretion. What I do is I put the seal's fur against the back side of the thread, and then I just take my thumb and my forefinger or my middle finger, and I'm rolling this back towards the back of the fly. Once you find out how you're going to roll this, always roll it in the same direction. The reason that I'm rolling it backwards is that every time I make a wrap around the hook, I'm locking it onto the shank of the hook. If you come the other way, you'll have a tendency to have that fall out. Again, a small amount, lay it behind the thread, and just roll it. And I'm just going to proceed with putting a couple of inches of material on here. I don't like to use wax on this. I like this to have a nice spiky appearance all by itself. I don't like to put any more wax on here than is already on the thread. This is a waxed 6/0 Danville Flymaster, I believe is what it's called. So I'll put on a couple of inches of this material, and I'll move my bobbin up to where the seal's fur finished. And as you can see up here in the front, I do have about 1/4 of an inch of just standard thread. It's not where the seal's fur is. The reason there is I can start to tie backwards. The seal's fur is going to start right about where my tail veiling is and give me a nice even proportion. What I will do is bring it around the hook shank, and I'll go with a seesawing motion. That will lay it flat on the hook shank and also capture my fibers so I can lock it in with the thread. I'm coming around now, and I'm about 1 wrap from where my tail veiling is. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to come exactly over where the tail is and then angle it forward. So I don't do anything with this until I get 2 or 3 wraps on to be sure that it's secure. Once I do that, and I have this on here, because of its texture, I want to show that off. So every time I make a wrap, or every other time, I pull back on the materials and pull it back towards the tail. So I'm not trapping these materials down. There's no sense with the expense of this material to have it all trapped in. Okay, and again, it's so much easier to work with just a short amount of material than to have things where you're hitting the table and having material fall off. When you're in control of your materials, you're going to find that your fly tying is going to be easier and less frustrating because you're not losing stuff on your bench, you're not hitting things with it. Again, I'll offer a small amount up. It's always easier to go back over it and put more on than it is to take it off. In this particular case, less is best. And I'll just keep putting it on again, sparse. I can add more if I need it. And I'm going the same direction. Oftentimes, if you find that you're having a hard time with seal's fur, you might want to try just putting a little bit of saliva on your fingers and trying to do it that way. And I'm not talking a lot, just a slight amount so that your fingers are damp. Sometimes people will keep a sponge handy, and then they can just basically tap the sponge and have just a slight amount of moisture on your fingers. Again, there's about 3 inches, 4 inches of material. I'll bring my bobbin back up to where it stops so that I'm in control of where I'm going. I have my fingers over the bobbin and the thread so that I can adjust the tension as I'm going so it's not pulling more thread out. And again, what I will do is trap those fibers down and then pull them back. I'm going to speed up a little bit here because this is pretty much mundane. And again, I have to remember proportions. I want to remember that I have to stop at 50%. So again, we'll take more of the seal's fur, tie it on in the same direction each time. Once you get in the habit of doing it this way, you'll find that your tying will become pretty easy, and you're going to find that your materials are going to be locked into the hook shank, and you're not going to have big chunks of things coming out or have an improper bulge someplace. And with this type of tying, it's more aesthetics than anything else, and you want things to be nice and clean and crisp. As you can see, sometimes I'm going over where I tied something. I'll go forward, come back a little bit. That's just to be sure that I'm locking in my materials and things are as sturdy, as put in there as sturdy as possible. Now the other thing that we'll do too is when we come through with these ribbings, with these 2 tinsels, we actually would like the tinsel to bind or bite into the seal's fur. That again will give us more of a spiky look. And before I go through and finish the fly or finish the body, I will go through with a dubbing needle and I'll pick some of that stuff out. Now I'm coming up to the point where I have to start really thinking about where 50% is. Again, we had the tinsel, we were going to go through with 5 wraps. So what that would basically tell me is that with 5 wraps of tinsel, and say I'm going to stop my fly where my needle is, then someplace about the middle of my fly is going to be where the 3rd wrap of tinsel is. That's going to be the change between yellow and orange. That is also where this particular feather is going to be tied in. So what I will do now is I'm going to figure I'm going to have to come a little bit more, and this is not an exacting science. I mean, if you don't like a 50-50 proportion, you could stop where you are right now and tie in the orange. I'm going to go with the traditional type of appearance and go with a 50%, or as close to 50% as I can. Now in the middle of the fly here, I can add a little bit more material to give me that cigar shape, which I kind of find appealing. And just pull these trapped spiky materials back. And I'm just about to where I would consider a 50% is. And as you can see, you can rough this up and spike that up, and it does give you a buggy type of look. I've got a little bit more material down here. I'm just going to take this and throw it right back on there. There's no sense in throwing this away because it's difficult to get. There are lots of other different types of materials that you can use if you cannot find seal's fur, which is very difficult to find. One of them is a material put out by Partridge called SLF, which is called synthetic living fiber. It's a man-made material but has a real nice spiky appearance to it and some wonderful colors. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to tie in our orange. But before we do that, we have to remember that we've got to put our body hackle in. That's where this particular fly comes in. We're going to feather. We're going to tie this in. This is going to be our body hackle. So before I tie in my orange, I would like to prepare this by basically holding the feather and trying to grab it by the tip. As you can see, this is very, very fine fibered flue that we have in here. And I'm going to try and find the center of the tip of this particular feather. And then just pull the material away so I'm kind of down to that particular type of look. And here's where I'm going to tie this in. Now this is a very, very fine stem, so we're going to have to really be extremely careful so that we don't break this off. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically take it and pull those fibers away. And I'm going to take this particular piece and I'm going to tie that in right where I stopped my yellow. So I'm just going to offer it up to the hook, put a wrap of thread around there, and just cinch it down. And do 3 or 4 or 5, 6 wraps just to be sure that it's in there and it's secure. And I'm just going to kind of let that flow off the back. And I'll reach in with my scissors and just clip this off. Now you're going to find that this is going to be kind of troublesome because you're going to have all this material that's in your face and in your way when you're going through and tying in or tying through with your tinsel. So it's going to be a hassle to work with, but you just have to kind of maneuver around a little bit, use your bodkin as you need to push things out of the way, and just get things where you need them to be. And I'm just going to cut off that, get this thing as much out of my way as I can, and get ready to put the orange seal fur in. The same type of proportions that we used with the yellow. This is a medium orange. Seals fur, again, it's a nice color combination with the orange against the yellow. And I just find that it's got good fishy color, and this is a fairly traditional pattern. And so that's why we're going to be using these particular colors. We're going to take it and do the same thing we did in the back. You have to watch that these fibers oftentimes will get in here and you'll end up tying them in. And you'll have to go through with your bodkin and pick them out. Same thing, I'm going one way. As you can see, that yellow fiber right now is trying to get in there. I just basically take it and move it out of the way. Or you can even, pull this thing out of the way so it's as far away from the material as you can get. Okay, what we're going to do now is just move all the materials out of the way and just take this and butt this up against the yellow. And as you can see, it's a pretty striking look. And I'm just going to go through and do exactly like I did with the yellow. And I will want to try to have a taper where I'm going to be big in the center and then taper down towards the front so that I'm not having a large bulky buildup in the front, because this type of fly has a fairly small head in the front, and we don't want to build that up. That's why, as you see the front of the fly here, as I turn it over, you'll notice that there is a section of stem or shank of the hook that is uncovered. The reason for that is I don't want to build it up with bulk with my thread. That's why I started back a little bit. When I go to finish and complete my head, I'll be covering up that section with thread, so it's right now it's just kind of naked and there's no buildup there, but I will cover that up. Again, pull your materials back out of the way and just progress forward. You can see these things can get out of the way. That's where your material clip can come in handy. You can just try and lock that stuff out of the way and build up that yellow or the orange seals fur. And that's kind of the desired effect that we're looking for right there, is to have all of the this orange is a little bit more spiky than the yellow was, but I think that in the front here we can pick this stuff out and give us a real nice buggy appearance, or in this particular case perhaps a fishy appearance. And oftentimes you'll find too that the seal fur will pick up errant fibers, and you will notice that. So I'm just going to reach in here and pull out a black fiber that had just gotten onto it from sitting on my vise base. And again, it's not on, I'm not really cramming this material onto the thread. I'm putting it on so it's on there firmly, but I'm not trying to make like a chenille out of it. I'm trying to keep it as loose as I possibly can to give me that nice halo-y type of effect. And you can see in the front now we're kind of getting that appearance. And you will see through this yellow fiber, this yellow feather, and you will see through to see the orange. And that's the nice thing about seal's fur, is that it does have that halo effect when it's in the water. And I think the more that you fish these types of things too, even in your own everyday flies, the better that they get. I think the water has a tendency to pull all the fibers back towards the tail, and it just gives you a real wicked look. And as you can see, I'm trying to pull the spikiness back so that I'm trapping those fibers in there, and that's giving me that nice effect. And you just have to grab some more. And sometimes these particular types of flies will utilize a fair amount of material. I believe that your chenille and things like that would be a lot quicker, but you're not going to get the desired effect that you will with using these natural fibers. There are some other types of dubbings out there that you might consider trying. One is called scintilla, which does give another nice effect, and it has a lot of nice colors for trout and for steelhead or salmon flies. So the list is endless. Try what you feel is good for you, or what's available to you, and just experiment with it. And you're going to be able to go through and pull some of these loose fibers out of here, as you can see I'm doing right now. And just by doing that a couple times, I've pulled out a fair wad of material. Now I'm just going to put it right back on the thread. Now I'm getting up to the point of the fly where I've got to think about proportions. In this particular case, the section that is black on the fly is going to be about my head space. So I have to come through and tie off my tinsels through the body. I have to tie off this yellow hackle through the body. And I also have to put a throat of teal on. And so I'm going to need at this particular time to take a look at this and to see exactly where I need these materials to go. What I oftentimes do is I will use a magic marker, and I will put a mark on this primrose thread to see where I'm going to stop my head. So at this particular point, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to mark this line right here on my side of the hook shank to give me about, and I'll put this dubbing needle up, this section from here to the front of the fly is going to be reserved for the throat and for my wings and for my head. So that's all the section that I need. And as you can see, there's nothing up there, so there's not going to be a lot of bulk. And that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm striving for, is not to build up bulk. These wings will basically lay flat over the top of the body like a V. And these are called D-stripped wings. The wings are tied from a turkey. This is a silver turkey, or you can call it dun-colored turkey. And we're going to utilize strips from both sides. This is what we would call a center tail feather, which means that the fibers on one side are just about as even as the fibers on the other side. And we're going to utilize sections of this that are going to be approximately that wide. And we're going to put one on one side and one on the other. But there are some manipulations that we're going to need to talk about in order to achieve a nice even look on the fly. We want to be able to straddle the shank of the hook in the front. So you've got 50% for a left wing, 50% for a right wing. And so this is a real fine material that we're going to use, and it lends itself nice because it has good fiber length. When you're looking at a feather like this, many people get discouraged. They don't know what side to use for which side of the fly. Again, we talked about left side, right side, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Take the feather with the good side. This would be the good side. This is the back side. And this is basically the way it would be stuck into a turkey. And so what we want to do then is just hold the feather over the fly so that you have the feather in this angle, and you hold it over the fly. The right side will be the right side of the fly. The left side will be the left side of the fly. The way that you're looking at it this way is the way that you're going to look at it over the wing. And that's really all there is to it on deciphering what's left and what's right. So we'll finish up the body. Just a wee bit more. Now the reason we don't like to have it built up extremely thick in the front is because we want that wing to lay low over the body. And if we have too much material, it's going to create a hump and a bump, and the wing is going to have to be able to get over that before it can lay flat over the body. And I'm trying to get rid of all this superficial material that is over the eye of the hook. And at this point in time, I'm going to leave things just the way that they are. As you can see, this orange is very spiky, and I'm going to kind of stand it up because I'm going to be running my tinsels through it, and I want to bind that down with the tinsel. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my bodkin. There are also some other tools that you can use to go through and to pick out fibers that are in the body. One's called a dubbing teaser, and I believe I have one here. If we've ever had the pain and pleasure of going to a dentist for a root canal, this is exactly the type of material that he uses to extract your root. So it's not a pleasant little tool, but it has little fingers, little fibers on it. And what it then does is you can reach in here and pluck and pull these materials out away from the hook. You can also use your dubbing needle the same way. So I mean, here's just another type of tool that you can purchase for the exclusive use of pulling out those fibers, or you can just use a regular needle. I'm going to move my feather away, and I'm going to come through and I'm going to spike up and lift up the seal fur, the yellow seal fur, to make it buggy. And I have to watch that I'm not going to hit the quill. What I'm going to do now is just let that feather sit like that, move my thread out of the way to the front of the fly, and now I have to go through the body and pull in the two tinsels. The first one that I'm going to go through and tie through the body is going to be the silver flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab it and basically pull it to me. To be sure, I'm going to have to use my dubbing needle as I do this to get the fibers away so that I can lock it in and pull this thing through tight. Now I have to remember that I want this tinsel on the third wrap to cover the stem of the quill. It's very important to lock this down with the tinsels, the two tinsels, the flat and the oval. So I have to kind of bear in mind that there has to be about the third wrap. So I'm going to come through, and what's nice about this is I can turn this vise around and see exactly what I'm doing the whole time I'm doing it. I keep my tinsel flat with fair tension. I'm pulling a fair amount of tension on this to be sure that I'm locking down those fibers. And I'm moving all this stuff out of the way as I'm doing this and really pulling on it. I'm exerting a fair amount of pressure on this tinsel. Again, just move the material out of the way. Use your needle to pull that stuff out of there. The third wrap of tinsel is going to have to be right on that stem, and I think I'm just a little bit shy, so I'm going to stretch out that second one and pull through so I'm creating a bump on the seal's fur. I'm coming around now, and I'm going to remove the seal fur between the yellow and the orange, and I'm coming right over that stem. And I'll do the same thing here as I'm going to take this through and move some of these fibers out of the way. When I get to this point, I'm going to take my thread, I'm going to back it off to where I was, and I'm just going to tie in that tinsel. I'm going to tie down the tinsel. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to take it all the way off. I'm going to cut it and just leave a little handle in case something should happen and I have to take it off. At this point, what I can do is, again, I can rough up the tinsel, rough up the body, and pull all these little spiky fibers that I perhaps locked in, pull them out to give you that buggy look. Now I'm going to have to follow exactly behind the silver with the gold. And I'm just going to take it and weave back and forth, remove this body hackle, and just lock it in. Now on my third wrap here, I'm going to want to lock in that fiber. Now every time that I'm taking my vise and making a wrap, it's adding a wrap of thread at the front. So I've made 3 wraps. I'm going to take a couple off, just so I don't build up bulk. Going side by side, weaving it back and forth. And take a couple wraps of thread over all that. And what I'm going to do is take my pair of pliers here, grab that silver, and wiggle it back and forth to break it off, just like we did at the butt of the fly. It's kind of like trying to break wire. Same thing I'm going to do with this is I'm going to cut it about 1/4 of an inch from where it was tied in. I'm going to take my tweezers and I'm going to grab that material and I'll pull that core off. As you can see, it's coming off quite nicely and it's separating from the cotton core. And what I'll do is the same thing. I'll just go back and forth and break that off. So now I'm not having tinsel on there. I've got 2 pieces of cotton core, which is much easier now to tie in than it is a hard metal tinsel. Okay, at this point in time, everything is pretty clear up here. I still have plenty of room. I'm going to take all this stuff that's in the front, these little fibers from the cotton core, any other little superficial hairs from the seal's fur, and cut it out of the way. Now I need to run my feather through. So what we're going to want to do at this point in time is be very easy and roll that feather through the whole body. You can't put too much pressure because you'll break that. We'll have to fix that tail later. But what we're going to want to do is to grab this feather by the tip and just pull the fibers side by side, pull them out of the way. Halfway through a wrap, what I like to do is to be sure that I've got these fibers on both sides of the shank of the quill. And what I'm going to do is just pull those fibers back. And when I get halfway over the body, I'm just going to hold it and let it take its own natural set. I'll grab the fiber again and pull it neatly behind the gold tinsel and follow it directly behind. And you can take your bodkin here and you can pull out some of these fibers because they will get trapped in there. There's just no way to keep it from being trapped. Let it take its own natural set. And again, I can take my needle and pull out these fibers that get trapped. Okay, at the front here, I have plenty of room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of wraps right where the body ended, just to add some bulk up here. And I want to fold the fibers over on each other and pull them back so that's coming out of one side of the feather. And it's kind of a messy procedure here because you've got these errant fibers all over. Okay, at this point in time, I'm just about finished with all of this, and I'm going to take it and pull it onto my side. At this point in time, I'm going to strip some of these fibers off of one side so I can see exactly where I'm at. I'm going to bring this up to 9 o'clock on my side. My thread is hanging here. I'm going to take the thread up through those fibers, and as I get to about the 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock position, I'm going to pull down on this stem to lock it on the side. Now this looks a mess right here. We'll clean that up a little bit here in a second. But what I want to do is separate these fibers to where my thread is. Take a couple of wraps and lock down this stem so it's completely tied down, and you're not having the stem tied in on the top or the bottom. It's at this side, and by pulling it down, you're locking it in right up against that eye, that gut eye that you tied in there. There's a little space there. Okay, at this point what we can do is reach in here with a pair of scissors and clip that stem and just remove it. At this time too, what I'm going to do is pull all this material back, and I'm going to run a couple of thread wraps over it to be sure that it's securely in there. And at this time I can take my dubbing needle and I can just run it through and pull some of these fibers out. So we're just going to run it through here lightly. You don't want it to break anything in here, but we're just going to kind of free up anything that we might have tied down. What I'm going to do is run this down the 12 o'clock line. That's down the top of the shank. What I'm going to do is just push it in here, and I'm going to separate fibers. And I'm going to pull the stuff on my side towards me. The stuff that's on the top, I'm going to push away to the other side. So I'm basically separating it 50-50. This is to allow clear access to the top of the fly. When I get to about this position, I come underneath with my fingers and basically pull on those fibers to get them out of the way. And then as I'm doing that, squeeze on it. And what this is going to do is get these fibers to come underneath, off to the side of our hook shank. And as you can see, you get this swept back appearance. And you can blow on it to get the fibers out of the way. So what that does is it gives you the fibers coming out from underneath the shank of the fly and off of the shoulders, off of its side. You can see there are some spiky fibers in there. You can leave them in there, you can pull them out, whatever you want to do. I just want a nice even area up here. This platform where we're going to tie in our head and everything needs to be clean. It needs to be free from any bulk and buildup. At this point in time, you can run through and you can pull these fibers out to give you that real spiky appearance if you wish. If it's as spiky as you want, leave it alone. You can see how much more bushy the orange is, but when it gets wet, you'll be able to see through that, and you'll be able to have a dimension, a three-dimension to it. Now where my thread is, what I want to be able to do is I have to put in a throat. What these flies traditionally called for was teal, and I'm just going to take my scissors here and just remove some of this superficial fluff that I have up in here, just to give me a flat platform. What I have here is I have some teal in a box, and some of this I use for traditional Atlantic salmon flies, and I go through and I match my pairs so that I know I have a left and a right. Very, very similar to what we've done with the turkey feather. I want a left and I want a right, and so that's why I have these marked here in a teal feather, or you can use gadwall, whatever you like to use, any waterfowl duck feather. You want this to go the same way and flow the same way that the fibers of the marabou is. So what I'll do is I'll go through and try to find a fly that has the proper curvature. And you bear with me here for a second until I find something that will be suitable. What I will do now is I have a teal feather, and as a right-hand tire, what I'm looking for is I want my fibers to be on this right side. This is the side that will be laying flat underneath as I wrap this. And what we're going to do is we're going to double this feather to get both sides of the feather coming off of one side. So we're going to take this side, fold it underneath the quill so it lays up against the other side. And so what we need to do is we need to lock this into a pair of tweezers or a pair of hackle pliers. These are English hackle pliers, and we just use these to facilitate wrapping hackles or other types of maneuvers. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically take and stroke these fibers out and straighten them out and try to separate them. This type of thing is done with most feathers when you're doing Atlantic salmon tying or steelhead tying, and you're wrapping these things through. Rather than stripping one side, you basically take it and you double it. We oftentimes don't need many wraps of teal. Oftentimes 2 wraps, 2.5 wraps is sufficient. It's just to give you some texture. I'm going to take the other side and do the same thing. As you see, I'm pulling backwards as I'm doing this. What I'm trying to do is break down these fibers so that they're not in that same, they're not laying in that same path that they were initially on the bird. So I'm breaking down the fibers by pulling them against the way that they want to go. At this point in time, I'm going to take this side and fold it over so it's against this side, but underneath. By taking the fibers, pinching them, stroking down, and pushing on them, I'll get these fibers to come underneath the shank and lay over on the other side. And I'm basically just pushing down and away on that one side. I'm trying not to disrupt the other side. I want that as straight as possible because that's the natural side that has a good curvature. And I'm just going to double this and push it and pull it just to get these fibers coming from one side, or as close as I can to coming from one side. This breaks down the fibers so that it comes out at nice angles and doesn't give you a lot of mess there. And that's kind of what we're looking for, is a doubled hackle. And that's what we're looking for. We're going to tie it in here by this tip. And I want something that's going to have a thin stem. If I have too much stem here and it's very, very thick, it's going to give me bulk up here. And I don't want that. I want as smooth as I possibly can to have this head up here small. So what I'm going to try and do is just make a couple of wraps and utilize this section here of the feather. So I'll take it out of its pliers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it with the good side up and basically turn my vise here. And I'm going to tie this in at about 3 o'clock. I'm just going to put a loose wrap around it, put 1 or 2 wraps, and then I'm going to grab this stem and pull it onto the side of the hook. 2 or 3 wraps, make sure it's tied in properly. And again, you got these little fibers trying to come in here and invade that space. Pull it to the side, get your thread out of the way, remove the tip, and we're ready to wrap this just the same way that we did the other thing. With most times when you're going through and wrapping any type of collar or feather, if you release it halfway through its turn, you're going to find that it'll go back to its natural set. If you hang on to it, you'll twist the stem, and you won't get a nice even laying of the fibers. And so what I'll do is I'll just grab the stem, and with my other finger, I'm just going to hold it here and guide it and push it around the hook stem. And I'm going to move the other fibers out of the way. And I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to push it around right tight up against where I finished with the marabou. Now, you can certainly use hackle pliers. That's perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, in many times it will help to facilitate hanging on to these things. But again, halfway through, I'm going to let the fiber go, push down on it with my finger, and let it have a natural set. Now, that's about 2.5 wraps, and that's really about all I'm going to do. I'm going to pull it up just like I did on my other one, hold it here with my thumb, remove a couple wraps of thread because I don't need them, hold my thread, pull the thread up, catch the stem, and then pull that stem down and lock those fibers down. Now, that's only 1 wrap right there, but it's just holding things. Same thing, I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to make another wrap through there. That's 2 wraps. I'll make 1 more just for safety's sake, and then I'm going to hold on to the bobbin here while I pull some of these little fibers that got trapped in there out. Okay. Take my scissors, tie it up against the side, lay it up against the side of the feather and pull that out. Now I'm going to take another wrap, and again, we've got more superficial little fibers there. And what I can do is, you can see it's this mismatched, or arranged, disarranged type of thing. I'm going to take these fibers, just put my needle in here, straighten them out, and pull them where I want them. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the fibers that are on top, and I'm going to pull them down onto the other side, and just get them so that they're all around, 360 degrees around the hook. And I'll get them into this position, and I'll do the same thing. I'll reach in here and I'll squeeze them to break down those fibers, to get them to lie where I want them. And you can do the same thing, is blow on this thing to get everything to fold backwards. And you can see the appearance that we're starting to get now is this real furry, wicked-looking effect. And in the water, you can just imagine how this thing goes through and acts. At this point in time, I have to change threads. I've got to change to black because now I'm going to finish the fly off. I'm going to put the wings on, which is the next step. And there are some little things I'd like to show you in order to make the set of the wings easier. So I'm going to take and I'm going to whip finish the front of the fly off right here where my primrose thread is. And I'm just going to go through lightly with 3 wraps, whip finish it off, and just cut the thread off. I put a little bit of tension on it just to remove the thread. So now everything up to this point is tied in. You've got your wing, your throat. This particular teal is called a collar. And right now at the front of the fly, there's really nothing up here. And I'm going to tie in black thread. This is the same as I used with the primrose, but this is 6/0 black. This particular model has a ceramic tube, which helps with finer threads. You don't break them. And so what I'm going to do is, contrary to tying in thread normally where you have it on your side and you go around in a clockwise fashion, I'm going to go opposite. I'm going to come towards me with the thread. This is called reversing your thread. And I'm going to basically start on the opposite side, and I'm just going to come towards me. The reason I'm doing this is that so when I'm setting my far wing, which I'm going to do first, the tension of the thread is going to be coming to me, and that's what I want. I want this wing is going to sit over the top of the back of the fly, and I'm going to have each wing occupying 50% of the shank. And so it's important to be able to have those 2 pieces where you want them. By taking my thread, if I went away from myself, which is the way you normally tie, if you tie in that wing, it's going to want to have a tendency to roll over the body. And that's not what we want. We want this thing to be able to be pulled up towards me to the position that I want. So that's the reason why I'm going backwards here, is this is typically just called reversing your thread. I'm locking the thread in, just cutting off the superficial stuff. And as you can see right now, there's really not a whole lot of room up in the front. Again, we're going to use the turkey, and I have a piece that's already cut. This particular fly, I want to be able to utilize the dun color that you have here. And although this fly has some ratty tips here, it's still going to be what I want to use. And as you can see, it has a stem. I've got one side over here is going to be one side of the wing, and this other side over here is going to be the other side. This piece here has some ratty tips, so I'm going to end up cutting that off with my scissors as close as I can to the stem. And herein lies some of what we're going to be talking about here, is utilizing the proper side of the wing so that you're getting these things to lay in properly. And of course, this is the good side and this is the bad side. What I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to keep a piece of quill attached. Now the quill is the stem, is the centerpiece. I'm going to want to have a piece of that attached so it acts like an outrigger, a tab. That's going to help me to push it where I want it to go. Now I can take my scissors and put it along the back side of the feather and remove the white pithy part of the flank or the stem here and try to pare off as much as I possibly can. And then with a straight pair of scissors, these are the same scissors I had before. As you can see, these are curved and these are straight. And I normally use the curved pair for most of my operations. And as you can see, the points on these have been filed as well, and this just really helps me to get into tight places. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this stem and I'm going to attempt to split it right down the middle so that there's a little piece with each one. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This time it's working. And I'm going to want to cut out a section that's about perhaps a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch. Now, of course, I pulled this off of what you would consider the left side. That's going to be one side of the wing. And then I have the quill on the other side exactly opposite to where I cut that one off. I'm going to cut this one off. I need to pair that up a little bit more. And I'm going to take my other side of the wing. Okay. At this point, you can see I have little rudders on it. These are little handles that I can use. And I'm just going to take the fibers and I'm just going to stroke on them and make sure that they're married well, that all the fibers are together. And I'm going to do that with both sides. And I'm going to try to get these pieces as close as I can to the same size, to the same width. And by going through and holding them up or laying them down next to each other, I can pair them up and remove anything that's not the same size and get it down so that the fibers are as close as I could possibly get to being even. The nice thing about working with turkey is that it's a fairly coarse feather, and you can actually reach in here and count fibers. You can take, for instance, when I'm going through and I'm counting fibers, I can take my needle and lay it right along the stem and just run it, and you'll hear a clicking noise. Well, you can sit and go slow and count. And what that will do is I want 8 fibers on one side, I'll count 8, cut it out, slip it in here. So there's a fiber that's 8, and I can go on the other side and do the same thing, so I get 2 even pieces. And that's important so that we've got wings that are going to be even. And that's what we're going to want to do, is have something that's as close to even as we can get it. And this is going to be right about where we want it. And I have a little bit of extra handle here I don't need. And as you can see too, I've got some white, what we call pith, which is the stem here. And I'm going to try to remove some of that so it's not in my way. And oftentimes what will happen is you'll find that you'll catch it with your finger and you'll move it around. But I want that handle there to act as a lever so that I can actually move this thing around. So I'm just going to get this wing together, and I'm going to put the far wing on first. So what I'm going to want to do now is the same thing I did on the other side, is to get rid of all this white stuff and get it down to a bare minimum of handle or quill holding it. I don't want too much because then it's just going to end up getting in my way. Okay, now that we have the proper size, what I'm going to do is that these wings are going to sit over the body like that. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to want to judge the length so that it's about where the tail is, and they're going to sit like a V over the back of the body. So I'm going to kind of hold it over the side of the fly. And then I'm going to, by pulling the thread towards me, it's going to want to roll the feather actually into the center of it. And by grabbing this handle, I can actually use it as a lever and put it right where I want it. So I'll just kind of judge it for length, make sure that I have about the right length. And I'll just kind of pinch it onto the side. And I'm going to take the thread and I'm going to go over it loosely. I'm just going to put a soft loop on it. And then I'm going to take it and I'm just going to push it where I want it. And I'm going to take this and tighten it up. But I'm pulling straight up on the thread. I'm not pulling it off to the side. And after I put like 2 wraps on there, I can take this handle and I can actually steer it to where I want it. Now it's occupying about 50% of the shank of the hook. Now I've got 4 wraps of thread on there right now. Now I'm going this way, so that really facilitates tying in the far wing. Well, now I've got my thread this way. How am I going to get it so that I can turn it so I can tie the other wing in? First thing you want to do is give yourself about 4 inches of thread, and I counterspin it to get it flat. Run my thumbnail down it, straighten it out. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to create like a little dubbing loop. I'm going to put my finger in it, and I'm going to put my thread right over where I stopped, and I'm just going to create a little loop, and I'm going to tie backwards right over the thread. what I'm doing in essence is I'm covering over this loop with the thread, and now I'm right back to where I was in the very beginning. I can take this little loop, reach in here with my scissors, cut it off, my thread is now reversed. Very simple operation, and something that facilitates tying in these types of wings. Okay, now that I have my other side, I've got one fiber here that is not even with the other ones. It's actually broken. And I'm going to reach in and just pull it out of there. As you can see, they come out nice and easy. I've got one fiber here that was just not even with the rest of them, and I can just pull that out of there. Stroke the fiber to get the proper look that I want. And now I have to do the same type of thing that I did before. I need to hold it up, offer it up to the hook, try to keep it a little bit on my side, take the thread and roll this thing up to the top. I want them to be even as I can get them. So I'm going to make sure that the length is about right, and I'm just going to slowly pinch it, get myself some thread, counter spin it, get it as flat as I possibly can, come over it with a soft loop, exactly where the last wrap of thread was on the far wing. If it's not the right length, stretch it out a little bit. Okay, a soft loop, and I'm going to pull the thread up. Put another wrap, which is 2 wraps now. I'll put 3 wraps just to be sure to hold it, and I'll grab this handle, and I'm going to pull it so it's 50% on one side and 50% on the other side. What this will do is give us a V-type shape over the top. And as you can see, these little outrudders here, one's coming one way, one's coming the other way. By grabbing that, I can twist that and pull it, and I can move it wherever I want it. So I can station these wings exactly at 50%. And as you can see here, right at the top, they're both meeting so that they're both 50-50. And that's what we're looking for. So right now, what I'm going to do is just check to make sure both sides are as even as I can get them. And I'm going to come over with one more thread wrap, and I'm going to hold everything while I do this to be sure that my thread wraps are nice and clean. One thing I'm having a problem with right now is I'm running into a piece of skin that I probably nicked with a scissors or something, and now it's very rough. When you're dealing with 6/0 thread, you can break it very easily by having rough fingers. What I end up carrying in my little kit here is just an emery board. You can also use a piece of pumice stone to clean up your fingers. What I'll do is I'll just take this and I'll just run it over my fingers to smooth out any of these rough spots so that the 6/0 thread or even 8/0 thread, whatever you're using, is going to really slide over my fingers and not cause an abrasion and take this and nick this line. It's thin enough as it is. You don't want any more taken off of there, and then you have superficial little floss pieces hanging out that does not give you a nice clean look. So I've taken that burr off, and I've got 4 wraps of thread, just like I had on the other side. And what I'm going to do at this point in time is I'm going to take this thread and I'm just going to back it off temporarily and just put it back to where I had my wing started. What I'm going to do now is these fibers are fairly coarse, and I want to be able to soften them up in order to cut them cleanly. If I try to do it now, they're so stiff that they'll jump and they'll move. What I use is a little bit of saliva on the end of my needle. And I just basically apply this in front of the thread wraps and just kind of paint it onto the fibers of the turkey. I know this is a little bit unethical, but if you use head cement, what will happen is rather than softening these fibers, you'll actually be making them harder, and you won't be able to cut them cleanly. And we don't want that. We want them to be soft so that we can really cinch them down and get them where we want them. And I'll just put a little saliva on there, and I'll just push it around, and I'm pushing it forward. I'm not pushing it back over the wing. And I'll basically just put that on there, and I'm just going to have to leave that for a couple seconds. And at that time, I can just come through and just regroom and look and make sure things are looking how I want them. What I'm going to do now is I've got 4 wraps forward, and I took 2 wraps and went backwards. The only reason for do that is just to get them out of the way. Again, with a sharp pair of scissors, it doesn't matter if you use the curved ones or if you use the straight ones. In this particular case, I'm going to use the curved ones because I can lay them close up against the shank of the hook. And while I'm cutting, I'm going to be squeezing the wings, so I'm not going to be moving them with the force of the blades. So what I will do is just pick one wing and cut it off, and then take the other wing and cut it off. So I'm just going to reach in here, squeeze, the wings, grab the feather, lift it up a little bit, and slowly cut through. And I might have to do it in a couple steps. Don't worry about doing it all at once. If you have to cut one fiber, two fibers, do that so that you're not causing a tremendous amount of pressure and twist this thing out of alignment. And I'll do the same thing on this one. I'll take it and I'll hold on to it with my fingers. I'll reach underneath it. I'll make a snip, reach in, make a snip and remove it. Now, with this particular pair of scissors, I have cut that thread a little bit and removed a few fibers. Now that's how pointy and fine these are. I'm not going to worry too much because I can cover that up right now. And as you can see, there's really no head here. There's not a whole lot that we have on here to finish up the fly. At this point of the progress that we've already gotten to, what we're going to do now is just finish off the head. And again, by doing this with flat thread wraps, you're going to find that you can put the thread where you want it and get the desired effect that you want. And I'm not pulling on my bobbin because I might get the wings to kick up or put some undue pressure. So I'm just going to take it, counter spin it, straighten it out, and you can actually watch the thread like a piece of ribbon flattening out. What I want to do at this point in time is I'm going to use some wax. This is a sticky type of wax. This is Wilson wax. And the reason I'm going to use this is I'm going to put some on the thread to keep it from sliding down over the eye and getting it where I don't want it. So a little bit of wax is going to help me, and I'm just going to take the tiniest amount and just cover the thread a little bit. And I don't want globs on it. I just want to run it through the wax. And if you do have pieces of wax that are stuck to it, just take your bodkin through and eliminate it, or move it to someplace else and push it around. I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to remove that little piece of thread that I have there. And at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to back up on my thread, make sure that it's flat, and now I'm just going to shape my head. I'm just going to take the thread and I'm going to go over all that area that I just got finished cutting off. And I'm just going to shape the head, just to cover up the little dark spots that I had on the wings. So that was about half a dozen wraps of thread. Again, I'm going to counter spin it, remove any of that piece of wax that I have on here, and I'm just going to take my dubbing tool again. And what I've done, oftentimes if you're working with wax or you get some things on your dubbing needle, what I end up doing is I have a small film container, and inside the film container I've loaded it with steel wool. And so I just snap the lid back on here, and I've taken another needle and I've gotten it hot, and I've just poked holes through the side of that compartment in several different places, along with in the top. So I can take my dubbing needle and put it in here and twist it and get any garbage that I have on there off, so it's a completely clean needle. There's no fiber, no residue on here, so it's not going to be sticking to anything. I'm just going to come through and eliminate some of this wax that's in there and remove it. And that's really about all we have to do. I'm just evening it out. There are other little subtleties that you can to do to these flies, and perhaps we will do that. Rather than finishing off in the manner that we have now, I'm going to take the jungle cock and we're going to add a little fancy accoutrement, if you will, to it. We're going to put some droopy jungle cock throat in, or a side. Again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach into my jungle cock and I'm just going to find a couple of nails. That's what we call these fibers here. And I want one from one side and one from the other. So I'm going to reach in here and pick one. And I'm going to come to the other side and try and find one that's about the equal size to it. And I've got two. Now again, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take the fluffy fibers and we're going to want to eliminate them. So what we're going to do is we want these to be fairly long. And so we want to leave enough of this to give us the proper look, but at the same time we don't want them to be so long that they've got a lot of furry fibers up here. Now, unlike what we did for the tail where we stripped all this off, what I want now is I want some of these fibers to act like outriggers. So what I'm going to do is take my straight scissors and I'm going to cut from the very, very butt end of it, not all the way to the quill, but almost. And I'm going to leave just a little tiny section on both sides. These are going to act as stabilizers. And as you can see, it's not a real clean look, but I've got a little bit of fibers on both sides, and I don't want them too long. But this is going to help to stabilize this nail. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. And I just want these to be about the same length, and I can look through and roughly judge or hold them up to one another and see exactly where you should do it. And what you can do is put the two back to back, just like you did on the tail, and then turn it over, and you'll be able to see where you cut on one side. Reach in, pull those fibers where you want them, remove that one fiber, the feather, and you can see right now, here's where I've got to make my cut on this side. So now I have two that are fairly close in size and still have a little bit of outriggers on each side. I'm going to now do the same thing that I did before, is I'm going to smash these with my pliers. But rather than coming in and doing it this way like we did, so that it's a vertical type of feather, rather than smashing it this way, I'm going to smash it sideways so that I'm creating a platform on the side that the thread will go over. And just a couple squeezes is really all you'll need. So I've got the one. This is going to be the other side. I basically just take it, put it in my tweezers or my pliers, and squeeze it. Once, twice, three times, just enough to flatten that stem out a little bit. Now what I also do now is I'll take this, you can see the feather has a bend to it, an arch to it. And when I tie this in, these little handles are going to get in the way. So what I do is I just put it in my finger, and I take my thumbnail, and I just give it a couple quick, short tugs on it, and it takes this thing and moves it out of the way so that I have a handle that I can use, that I can take this thing and put it exactly where I want it. So there's one, and I'll do the same thing with the other one. I'll just lay it on the tip of my finger, put my thumbnail on it, and I'll just give it a couple sharp pinches and move the handle out of the way. What I'm going to do now is my thread is back exactly to where the wing started. I'm going to tie these in, and I'll show you by holding this one here. I'm going to have these so that they're kind of droopy. Rather than have them on the side like a normal fly would do, we're going to tie these in so they're kind of droopy. Give us just a little accent to the front of the fly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie this one in first by holding it on my side, and I'm just going to hold it in place with my thumb, and I'm going to put a loose wrap of thread over it. And again, I got a handle. I can take this and move this however I want it. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other side. Now I've got one wrap of thread holding that. That's all. That's really all I need. These are both measured. They're both the same. So what I'm going to want to do on this one is do the same thing. Just kind of get it where I want it, hold on to it, bring the soft wrap of thread over. I'll come over again just to have two. And then I just got a little handle here. I can move it wherever I want. And I'll just check it out from the front. And if it's not where you want it, if it's not in the same exact place, then you can just grab it, grab a hold of the handle, and pull it where you want it. And then I'll check it again and look, and it's coming along. I can take my dubbing needle here and actually push the fiber down a little bit and get it right where I want it. And if it's not where I want it, lift it up, because all these things can move. Okay, that's about even with both sides. So if you look at this side, it's even, and if I turn the fly around, it's even on that side. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put about 2 more wraps of thread on to be sure that it's secure. Flat wraps. Okay, and that's really all I got to do. I'm going to move them. I'm going to put another one just to move it out of the way, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come through with my scissors, grab that handle, that outrigger, reach in, and snip it off. Do the same thing with the other side. Okay. Now, you can see sometimes that there's little white dots on the head that you haven't covered with thread. And rather than going through and adding 4 or 5 more wraps and making the head bigger, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit, I'm going to take that same magic marker that I used before, and it's a fine-tipped magic marker, and as long as it's black and it's an indelible marker, this is a Pantone, I'm just going to take this now, and I'm just going to basically touch the ends of the jungle cock, which is going to give it a little bit of black cast to it, so that I don't see all these little dots at the end of the head. And that's really all I have to do. The only thing that we've got to do now is whip finish it, and the fly is complete. I've got my thread back at the very, very back portion of the wing, and I'm going to simply go through and whip finish it with about 3 to 4 wraps of thread, flat thread, again, no bulk. Straighten it out, use my whip finisher, start right at the base of the wings, and just progress forward. Okay, what I do is after I remove this, I kind of hold on to the thread with my thumbnail and I pull it directly underneath at 6 o'clock. So now my whip finish is complete. The only thing I've got now to do is cut the thread off. Oftentimes if you reach through with your scissors and you cut the thread, what will happen is you'll leave a little tiny stub. And I'll know this is not a big deal, but to make something a little bit more neat, what we want to do is just open up, this is exaggerated, but open up your scissors, and if this fiber were to be our thread, what we're going to do is we're going to open up our scissors and lay them into the scissors so that the fiber is in there, and then by pulling down on the bobbin, you're going to create pressure. Just take those scissors now and just push them forward, and they'll shear it off really nice and smooth. What will happen is by shearing it, it'll actually get sucked up to that last wrap of thread that you did for your head, your whip finish, and it makes for a much more neat type of finish. What I'll do is I'll roll this up, put a little bit of pressure, open up my thread, and just push through. A little bit of pressure down there, and you push it, it makes for a nice, neat finish. The only thing we have to do now is to put some head cement on. At this point in time, what I will use is this is a Von Schiegel head cement, and it's a very, very thin, as you can see, it's very watery. And this is what I would call a construction type of cement. It's very thin, and it soaks into the thread wraps very, very well. So it binds everything that's underneath them. What I do is, if you'll notice, it has an adapter here it's like a little regulator valve, and it has a little brush. And I've taken and cut that brush down with a razor blade so that it doesn't get too much head cement coming out of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of this cement on the end of my needle, not on the end of the needle, but on the heel of the needle. And the point of the needle is actually clean. It's clear. There's nothing on it. I'll actually apply the head cement with the heel, and then I'll distribute it with the point. This way here, and I wipe that every time that I do this, I wipe the head cement off so that it's a nice clean needle. With every time I put it on, there's no buildup and there's no fibers in there. So again, I'll run it down, I'll put some head cement, and I'll roll it over a little bit, and I'll guide it on with the heel, and then I'll administer it with the tip. This way I get to put it exactly where I want it. Wipe it off and do it again. And you're going to notice that this particular type of head cement just sucks right up into the fibers. This is not a finishing type of head cement. I use this merely to form the head and to penetrate, to give me a nice, deep type of adhesive that actually holds everything together. And I'll just rotate, as you can see, another nice feature of the vise is I can just keep turning it around and putting this exactly where I want it. I do not want to get any head cement on the wings. I want the wings to be clean, because otherwise it'll suck up into the fibers and give you a little discoloration. Not that that's a sin. We've come this far and done things correctly. There's no sense in trying to goof it up now. And again, I'll go around once or twice, because by the time I get to where I started, it's already been sucked up into the fibers. Okay, that's about all we have to do. At this point in time, what I will do is I'll let this almost dry. It's not to the point where it's hard, but it's no longer tacky. What I will do at that point is, because sometimes there's a little lump or bump, what I'll do is I'll use the barrel end of my dubbing needle, and it has a smooth taper to the end where it's been sanded. What I'll use that for is I'll actually go around the head and smooth it. This way here I'm preparing my head for a final coat of head cement, which will be a more lustrous type of head cement to give me a clear, nice, well-rounded head. And that's what I would like to do. But at this point in time, I'm just going to use the thin cement to get into all the bindings, all the thread wraps, to hold everything together, and then to shape it. And that's really all we have to do at this point in time. And I'll just take it, and I'll guide it with my finger, and I'll just roll it over the head of the fly. And you'll find that you'll get all those little thread wraps to flatten right out. And there we have it. This is a yellow eagle, an Atlantic salmon de-stripped wing salmon fly. These flies were used again in the 1800s for Atlantic salmon in Scotland and England, Ireland, Wales, and they were made with long flowy hackles to basically move in the water and to attract fish from their lairs. And it's, to this day, I still think it'd probably be a very, very effective steelhead and salmon flies. Thank you.